Welcome, everybody. It's an exciting night for us. We've got a fantastic guest who is the person who's going to help us kick off the Bird Feeder Speaker Series for the fall semester. Um, Travel with me now to a galaxy far, far away. There's a little place called Barton Hall, which many of you probably don't remember, but that's where Stanley and I first met, on the fourth floor of Barton Hall. The building used to be where the library is right now. Stanley was a student in my intro to copy class. He, I think, humored me to some degree, knowing that he's got this strong visual background and he wanted to know just enough copy to be dangerous. And certainly he has gone on to become a danger to anyone who is sort of resting on their laurels and expecting lackluster creativity and design. It had been a number of years. We didn't keep in touch, but not too long ago, maybe 2 months ago, I'm reading one of the websites that I like to read to stay inspired. It's called The Little Black Book. And I suggest you guys, especially if you're creative, look for that one after we're done our show here. But I saw a profile of Stanley on The Little Black Book and I said, wow. First of all, what a great story. And second of all, wait a minute, I know this guy. And he had ventured off into a part of the creative world that probably didn't exist 10 years ago, or at least the title didn't exist. People were doing this stuff, this experience design, but no one really knew what it was or what to call it. And it all started to come together for me when something that Greg Feistman, one of the PR professors, says all the time is, the students we're teaching today will have job titles that don't exist. And I said, you know what, that's right. That's exactly right. So let me get somebody in here who had a job title that didn't exist not that long ago, started out with a very traditional background in our program, but made his own road, traveled an uncharted route to success. And I tell you what, just in terms of places that I aspire to and places that I watch, Stink Studios is one of those places that, you know, if something happened to me and I didn't work at Temple tomorrow, I'm putting my book together to try to get a work at Stink. So I'm impressed at the trajectory of Stanley's career. I am even more impressed that he said yes when I asked him to come speak with you guys. So what we'll do is Stanley's going to tell his story. He's going to share some of his experiences. Hopefully you find some parallels for yourselves. At the end, we got time. We'll do Q&A. You can ask any questions about, you know, projects that you may see, creative philosophy, even little stuff like, you know, how do you chart a course for yourself as a young creative and give yourself the great likelihood and the great path to do something new and interesting and exciting. So sit back, relax. You know, it's called the Bird Feeder for a reason. It's for us to just sort of relax and recharge and feed off one another. I was joking earlier today. Someone said, "Why didn't you call it a bird bath?" And I said, "Well, I want everyone to keep their clothes on." So, you know, again, we're gonna nourish each other with some interesting content and some conversation, and really, you know, one of the great things about this is we can bring Stanley in. We don't have to worry about you know, travel and all those headaches. So again, it's another thing that we can do to just embrace exploring new and interesting things. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Stanley, you can hop in and take over. Everyone stop listening to me and let's hear what someone on the creative front lines has to say.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. That was definitely more than what I expected to have. So I appreciate it. So as a mini disclaimer before we dive into this next hour, I like to use a lot of GIFs. So, just a heads up. It's done in a fairly tasteful way, but this is how I like to express how I feel about certain topics, especially when I'm talking about experience design in particular. So first off, thank you. When Joe had initially reached out to me about this, one, I was like kind of surprised. And then two, I'm like, dang, like it's been that long since I've yeah, like even been on Temple's campus, let alone had opportunity to speak to Temple students. So I'm definitely honored to be here, and I'm excited to kind of walk you guys through not only my own personal experience, but also what experience design is. Like Joe said, it definitely wasn't a thought in my mind of this space when I was in school. And I feel like that's a narrative for a lot of people. And even when I started diving into it, it was still pretty fresh, and it has definitely changed over even like the last 5 years. And so hopefully this can be as insightful for you as it was for me when I initially learned about it. And so my goal today, overall, is to pretty much kind of go off what Joe said, pretty much show you guys how you can take the skills that you've acquired already, skills that you will acquire throughout the rest of the time at Temple, as well as when you start diving into work, and how that can kind of be the placemat and the foundation for you to do something else that may not be fully associated with what you thought you were going to do. And so diving into it, I fell into this world of experience design. It was definitely something that, again, didn't really know anything about. It was the summer 2015 when I applied to VCU Brand Center for grad school, and I applied as a art direction student, and I got kind of recruited into experience design just based off of my work and my vacation, and I never looked back. And so a lot of things you would commonly hear in the advertising industry in general is that people just fall into it, and that's definitely fairly true, especially true with experience design. And so let's figure out what is experience design before I even dive into it. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with it, or if you are, like how deeply you understand it. But the goal for me today is to give you to answer some of those questions that you may have, to kind of dive into how I define it based off my own personal experiences, and learning about it, but also using it and applying it to the work that I've been working on over the past few years. So overall, I got you. Don't worry. If you didn't know what it was before, you will know by the end of this presentation. And so first, I think we have to ask ourselves this broader question, is like, what are people? And you're probably like, what type of question is that? And why is that even relevant to what we're talking about today? Well, let me tell you, it's relevant. And so, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Lovecraft Country. It's by far one of my favorite shows that's on right now. I'm kind of sad that the last episode is coming on this Sunday, but I will digress on that point. But there's a quote in the passages in the book itself that hones on this point of stories are like people, and essentially, Tick, who's Atticus, who's like the main character, loving them doesn't make them perfect. You try to cherish their virtues and overlook their flaws, and the flaws are still there, though. And I think when you think about people, when you think about people's experiences, it can kind of be morphed into this thought, right? It can be morphed into this thought of people have problems that they're constantly trying to solve. People have triumphs that they're constantly having. And so when you're as a designer, you're constantly thinking of how can I design around these problems? How can I design around these stories and kind of elevate them a little bit further? And so, breaking that down a little bit more, we the people have problems that need solving. And these problems are even problems that we don't even know exist yet. And so I think over time, what we've seen since like the beginning of man over and over the last, centuries and stuff, people have this ability to take problems and apply design solutions to them, not knowing that they're designers themselves, but applying these different types of solutions to all these problems. And over time, as we get more resources and more technology and more data, more information, this way of solving these problems have expanded into on a new level, using different forms of technology, different forms of information to really enhance whatever experiences that you may have or want to experience. And so with that in mind, kind of take a step back and reflect on your day, and think about all the macro and micro interactions that you have throughout the day. Think about, whether you're making a video on TikTok or you're swiping left and right on Tinder, or if you're, riding your bike in a bike lane, or if you're taking a step to go someplace. All these different micro and macro interactions, how I see it is essentially experience design. Because the core of experience design is you, the user. It's really understanding the user and the problems that they have and trying to figure out different ways to solve around that and design around that to provide a more seamless experience for you. Because essentially people ignore design that ignores people. I'm pretty sure you guys can count on probably surpassing your 10 hands how many experiences you had that was really poorly done based off how it was designed. You can have something that's designed really well, but lacks utility. You can have something that has utility that lacks authentic design to it. My job is essentially to combine those things together, to design stuff around people and make sure that they have a utility, make sure that it's solving a certain problem, but also making sure it looks good and making sure it feels great when you're actually experiencing it. And so when you think about experience design, I think a lot of times people frame it as just like websites or apps. And it's not just that. It's those things, yes. And a lot of things go into it, from research to figuring out the information architecture behind it, to figure out the data behind it, doing user testing. But all those things, same things can be said about the checkout line in grocery store. Why produce is the first thing that you see when you walk into a grocery store. How retail stores are structured, even if they like apply ways for you to do cashless checkouts, airports, bike lanes, and how they're structured on the roads, packaging, public transportation, your home, like everything essentially is designed with the need of solving a problem, providing you with utility, and making sure that the design is done in a very seamless and easy way to use so that it's accessible for everybody. And so everything that we have, everything that we experienced, everything is essentially measured by the experiences that you have. As a experience designer, I'm looking at the trends and behaviors of people to inform me of what I need to do to ensure that you have a solid experience on whatever you're exploring. Experience design is not driven by just one single principle or one single thing. It's driven by a lot of things that I know a lot of you guys are diving into now at Temple. It is design, it is strategy, it's research, it's storytelling, it's talking about things about accessibility, sociology and psychology, it's understanding user behaviors and like design thinking. It's conceptual as well. It increments service design and data. And so this is just like a small range of what experience design encompasses, and which I think is confusing sometimes because it's like, damn, like that's a lot of shit to like really think about. But when you take a step back, a lot of you guys are already doing some of this stuff already in your classes and how you think. And so for the time remaining, I kind of want to walk you guys through myself, and really kind of draw that connection back to how I got into experience design and why, and how that opinion and my viewpoint that I just showed you was shaped by all my experiences that I've had thus far in my life. And so again, another Lovecraft reference, and forgive me if you have not seen it, but hopefully this will propel you to go see it. Hippolyta is one of the main characters in the show, she finds herself. Actually, let me backtrack. Lovecraft is like a very supernatural type show, so universe. vortex. It makes sense here. But Hippolyta finds herself going into like the universe and vortex, and where she's exposed to a wider range of data, information, knowledge that you can't even like wrap your mind around. And she's essentially using that information to shape who she wants to be, using that information to inform essentially the things that she wants to do. And I think as we sit here in this conversation, I think going back to the point Joe was making, you know, using what I learned at Temple and all my job experiences and using that to kind of mold what I want now, where I'm at right now, is the same thing that everyone on this call can do. And so going back to that point of falling into experience design, you know, it was definitely something that I felt prepared for because I had the skill sets and the knowledge around some of those fundamental things like strategy, design, you know, design thinking, understanding people, research, all the things I acquired over the years. So I felt I was ready in a position to take that on and take it to another level. And so Maya Angelou has this quote that I think is fairly relevant to everyone on this call is, you know, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. But to expand that a little bit more, the more creativity you use, the more creativity you have, the more places you can apply it. Same thing with experience design. The more places experience design can be applied to all those different places I called out earlier and more. You know, creativity is just a vessel essentially for you to do whatever you want to do and apply that to that area. And so as a kid growing up, I've always had a desire to be creative and I've always had a need to solve problems. Um, and I had a challenge and struggle trying to figure out how that was going to essentially manifest and what that meant. And that led me to where I'm at now at St. Studios. St. Studios is an international agency. I work in Brooklyn, but we have offices in LA, Buenos Aires, Paris, London, Tokyo. And essentially, you know, we're a studio and we call ourselves a studio because we have multiple different disciplines that can be applied across different problems. You know, we just don't make websites. We do everything from websites to product launches to campaigns to you know, looking at packaging. So essentially, being at a space that applies how I see experience design in multiple different levels was a right fit for me. And so right now, hopefully it plays pretty well for you guys. I'm just going to play like down like a reel that we have before before I go a little bit deeper. So hopefully it plays for you guys. So yeah, that's just like a body of work. I actually started in March, so I'm fairly fresh. I started during COVID. But essentially, that work that they've been able to put out over the years has pretty much put like gravitated me towards the ANC, and being able to have the privilege of working there and creating even more work on top of that is definitely something that I am privileged to be, but also it's definitely a space that really elevates experience design in a way that's transformative across different mediums, and that's how I view experience design. And so, thanks for you is definitely aligns with how I see that right now. Um, but let's take a step back a little bit. Like right now, I'm working as a UX designer slash strategist. So I'm working on anything that comes to the door that deals with UX design, as well as working on strategy strictly for different brands and pitches. But before that, as you can see, like none of my previous roles is that. Like, I was an art student, I was doing art direction, creative type stuff. The only experience design thing I had really was, being at Brand Center. And so, but the thing that all these have in common that kind of led me to this point is that all these roles I've had in the past um, are pieces of what UX design and strategy is. I've learned strategy within all these positions. I've learned design. I've learned how to do everything I needed to do based off all these different experiences. So even though these aren't a direct parallel to what I'm doing right now, there's pieces of what I've learned and what I've used to kind of get to where I'm at right now. So let's rewind a little bit and kind of go and give you more insight into that. So it all started back off in 2009 or 2010 when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a profession. I was exposed to Kahini Wiley, who's a phenomenal artist, and I was gravitated towards his work and pretty much around what he was doing. And so for me, I chose to attend Temple Tyler School of Art. I wanted to go to art school to kind of, be the next Kahini Wiley. Clearly, that did not work out. But, I also wanted to go to a school that had other programs just in case I decided to change my mind. So, so that kind of got me to a point where I was able to learn how to convey intent. Anything within the fine arts space, you have to have, when you're creating something, you have to have some form of intention when you're creating that. So making them parallel back to experience design, when you're designing anything for a user, you have to do it with intent. You have to essentially understand what problem are you solving, what type of service or utility are you trying to provide. Without that intention, it just all falls apart. So that understanding kind of came from me diving into the fine art space and applying that thought or that principle to what I do now. And so going into making a little shift, right? It's 2012. Me and my homie are like, we need to get into something else. We discovered the advertising program at SMC, which was SMC at the time. Not trying to date myself or anything. And so, we went to Dana, the OG, and she suggested that we go to where all the Black people are at in advertising. And essentially, I want to say it was the second year that they had it. I think they started in 2010, we went in 2012. And that just changed my perspective as far as like something else for me to do. Seeing people like Jimmy Smith and seeing pioneers on the stage. I worked at places like Wine and Kennedy, working on brands like Nike, doing some phenomenal work, and saying, seeing that the possibility. And so that kind of got me into a space where I'm okay, art direction may be as close to art to an art direction. So let me finesse it to a work in a way that will kind of get me to the next level. During that time, during my up until 2014 when I graduated, I was able to learn the fundamentals of strategy and concepting. Wasn't really exposed to those two things prior to diving into the program. And I think that foundation really established how I think and approach different problems, as well as the value of thinking of things from a conceptual level. And so essentially after I graduated, had a hard time finding a gig, was able to land a internship in New York City at Arnold in like the fall of 2014. So I commuted from Philly to New York twice a week for internship, paying like $10 an hour. But trying to make it, trying to get some experience, and I look at the opportunity as an opportunity that really set me on a pathway to get to where I'm at right now. I met my mentor, Tara Garcia, the ride or die. I was literally talking to her earlier today about this. And it really gave me the foundation of like one, like mentorship and networking is key. But then secondly, I didn't really learn too much about art direction or concepting necessarily my 6 months working at Arnold. What I really learned was about hustle and how to use your grit to kind of get to the next level. And essentially, you know, learning more about the industry, especially in New York, the mecca of advertising, and learning more about art direction from an industry standpoint, I kind of was able to learn what I didn't want to do, what I was interested in doing. And so that kind of started to like frame my pathway forward. And then I found myself, jobless, in Philly. So I decided to go back to Atlanta where my mom lives. And during that time, I had to really figure out how to deal with failure. And when you think about design, design is full of failure, right? When you think about experience design, it's full of failure as well. You have to go through a series of trials and errors before you figure out that one thing that
What's
works
up,
for
babe?
you. And so essentially,
What do you need something? Oh, okay.
cool. Sorry. So yeah, I pretty much had to figure out how to deal with failure in a sense, but I think that also helped me one understand the process of designing and how that is part of a series of trials and errors. But more importantly, it kind of helped me frame even more what I was interested in doing, what I wasn't interested in doing, even based off like the little freelance jobs I took on. And so in 2015, I took a dive and applied to Brand Center. Like I said, initially I applied as an art direction intern, and I kind of got finessed into experience design. But during that opportunity, I was able to one tap into a lot of different things. Got to go to Cannes, which was an amazing opportunity. Got to intern at Intuit, where I was able to gain a understanding of human-centered design from a product level. I had an opportunity to go to Adidas in Germany to interview. Didn't get a job, but I got to go to Germany. So it was a cool breakdown in which I was able to learn how to apply like creative problem solving, which is like the core of Brand Center, and apply that to user-centered design. Outside of building on my existing debt, I was able to take everything that I learned from Temple, to take everything that I learned from interning at Arnold, and take everything that I learned from Brand Center and kind of mold it a little bit more. But it's where I will lead to next. And I started working after I graduated. I got an opportunity working at Arts and Letters Creative Co. I was a startup in 2015 in Richmond. They're massive now. I think they just became like Adweek's like fastest growing agency in the world or something like that. But I spent 2 years, almost 2 years working at A&L. One of the only experienced designers working under a guy who was a copywriter at the Creative Lab. So I mean, it was definitely an interesting process to see how you can start a business and grow it. That was pretty much my first exposure to that. I learned how to apply everything I learned from experience design and the principles to more brand strategy and brand comms focused content, in which I was able to apply UX design, dig more deeper on strategy in the way I have done before, as well as getting new skill in editing and learning how to do that for different spots and commercials for our clients. Dove into concepting and art direction on a level I haven't done before. And so all of it really was a good foundation for me to expand existing skills that I had, as well as for me to essentially change my viewpoint of experience design and how I could apply it to different things. I had an opportunity to primarily work on Google, but also a lot of different projects where I was able to put this in practice, where I was able to kind of merge my thinking of experience design, but framing it in more of a marketing, brand, comms friendly way. You know, and I think from that point, I started to had like an affirmation and belief that experience design is essentially can be applied to anything in any profession, in like within any space. And so at that point, you know, once I realized that, I was like, okay, I'm about to quit my job. So I quit. Didn't have a backup, you know, it was definitely something that was fairly risky. But I got to a point where I felt that I met the moment as far as like how far I could go at A&L. And I was looking for something else that could propel me a little bit further within the experience design space that aligned with how I thought about it. So, you know, 10 months later, it was a long journey. 10 months later, you know, I was fortunate enough to land a job at Scenic Studios during a pandemic of all times. But, you know, Scenic had a very similar vision to what I had when it came to experience design at the moment. My view of experience design has definitely changed over the last 5 years. And I don't see it stopping as far as like changing, or I don't see myself stopping as far as like seeing different ways I can apply it to, or how I can apply it. You know, I'm interested in looking at retail experiences and how to design within that space. I'm interested in seeing how you can take tangible products and create a digital space for that. And so, you know, whatever opportunities pop up within that framework, you know, I'm definitely going to tap into. So long story short, before I end this, you know, my journey is, you know, unique to myself, but I think it has pieces that could be unique to you, to everyone on this call. How you can take a thought, which was my thought was like this sense of wanting to be creative and solve problems as a kid, and how that can be morphed and changed and can be applied to so many different disciplines, and can be applied to so many different areas over time. And like Joe said, like, you know, experience design wasn't necessarily something that was a focal point. You know, when I attended Brand Center, my class was the first year of experience design in the way that it was being taught. And that was in 2015. It's definitely different in the last five, definitely has changed in like the last 5 years. And so going forward, as you guys are like trying to figure out, you know, what skills do I have now? What skills do I want to acquire? And what skills you may fall into, you know, don't be shy and afraid to kind of dive into a new realm that you may be unfamiliar with. You know, I was unfamiliar with the experience design space, but once I started learning more about it and learning more about how it aligned with how I thought, I was able to dive into it. And, you know, I've been fortunate enough to have all the different opportunities I've had since then. And so without further ado, thank you. And that's the end of my little mini chat.
All right, that's good. It's always hard, Sally. There's no round of applause on Zoom. I'm sure I see
No.
lots of pause out there in the screen. I'm going to turn it over to the group in a second, but let me just ask a couple quick questions. The first one is, walk us through, what is your to-do list like? What's your inbox like? You know, what are the nuts and bolts of a week for you feel like?
Well, currently it's crazy. It just honestly just depends on what it is. Advertising and working in like the advertising space, it's like you have weeks where you're busy and you have weeks where you're, you know, chilling. And so right now I'm working on 3 different projects, you know, fairly tight deadlines coming up this fall and going into the next year. And so pretty much, rather most agencies do this, but like stand up meetings for different projects. morphed into different meetings. It's only me, my director of UX. We're the only two UX designers in the US, and we have a UX director in London. That's it. And so anything that comes through the door in regards to that, I'm working on with her, as well as working on separate projects on my own. When I initially started working at Scenic, I got thrown on Google for obvious reasons because I was already familiar with the brand. And that has changed. Some weeks I'm working on pitches, and pitches will normally last about a week or 2 weeks. So that's fairly fast paced. And with those projects in particular, I'm working on UX, but I'm also working on developing the strategy and how we want to approach it. And so it really just depends, honestly. This was definitely a nice little break from all that overall. But it really just depends on what's going on. Right now it's pretty crazy, but I feel like, in a couple of weeks, it'd be pretty slimmed down.
All right, great. So the last one for me and everyone else, think about your questions when I open it up. Feel free to unmute yourself, just fire away. If you're more comfortable, throw it in the chat. I'll call those out for Stanley. I'm sure you got a soup to nuts, very thorough education at Temple, right? You left with your head full of all sorts of stuff, but I am sure there are things that as you started to hustle your way up the food chain, which is impressive. I mean, just the places you've been are just, Arnold alone is a great place. But anyway, what's some of the stuff that you wish you had known, or some of the things that you had to learn along the way that would have helped you? Maybe some of these students here can collect some experiences before they get out.
Yeah, definitely. I think what I would say would probably be more relevant to like my time, at least at Temple, just because the industry itself has changed drastically and the playground has expanded like crazy. One thing that I would say, diving into it, is just getting a broader understanding of like the industry and what it entails. I think while I was at Temple, we, like most places, even at Branson, there's a more of a focus on, Ogilvy, DBBO, all those, iconic agencies that's doing some stuff. But underneath that is a slew of phenomenal tiny shops or different shops out there that, I had to kind of dig, even while I was in Branson, to like kind of dive into and trying to explore and see what fits. St. Studios is like, low key. There's a lot of different studios across, Philly, Richmond, New York City, LA that people don't really know about that are doing some phenomenal work for some of the biggest brands. And so I think that's definitely something to kind of leverage and try to look into, but mostly looking into it so that you can understand what skill sets you need going into the job. Definitely different art direction and what was required, I think, is definitely different now than what it was like 6 years ago. But understanding what skill sets you need, understanding where you need to be at in order for you to apply for those opportunities, I think is key. And understanding like what is needed to kind of get a job or get an internship there. And also, every place is different. So, how Preacher in Austin, how they may measure art director is different from how Mother in New York may measure art director, So, it's all these different places of how they may define it. And so when you're starting off, just having a clearer POV as far as like what you want to do. Even, I'm not saying it needs to be like 100% concrete, but just have an idea of what you want to learn and what you want to gain going forward.
Okay. All right. Great. So let's open it up. Anyone got a question or comment?
Hey Stanley, George here, the real George Schwab. Gave my RSVP link to all my students, and it all came through as George Schwab. But I was really curious, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about, you're talking about, you took the risk, you took the leap, you quit your job, you had kind of this downtime. I think you said 8 months, and then you found Sync, and it sounded like when you went to go interview there, there was like an immediate kind of connection in the sense that your philosophy or the way that you're thinking about user experience design and the way they are internally, you know, we're meshing. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that. I know in my own professional experience and thinking about coming out of school, you know, being really discouraged when I felt like I had a really good portfolio and I wanted the work, and places would shoot me down. And I had a similar experience with where I'm at now at Finch Brands, where I literally just walked in and started talking to these people, and they literally were saying things that I had been thinking about for, you know, like 8 years. Yeah, curious if you could like tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe a little bit of advice about kind of getting out of school and trying to apply for those first jobs and that kind of experience.
Yeah, definitely. So after I decided to leave A&L, you know, I had already kind of started a job hunt that was a lot of, you know, dead ends. And so when I made the decision to jump, it was mainly because I realized that the work I was making, even though it was good work, it was only like commercials and like microsites and stuff like that. You know, it wasn't getting me to the point where I needed to get to, especially based off of the interviews I had. And so I had to take some time to figure out how I could position myself in a way that would be appealing to different places that I was applying to. Took me a minute to figure that out because I had to go through a series of interviews that so I can learn. Okay, well, can't really go heavy on a product shop because I really don't have any experience doing that. I only have experience doing commercials. I don't have any experience like going through the whole like pushing out a product. So that's probably not my niche. So I kind of like started to rearrange how I was approaching the whole job hunt. And so at the end of it, you know, I was able to get three, you know, opportunities from three definitely different places within the space. You know, and you know, sync from what they were offering just made more sense to where what I wanted to kind of go towards. I was looking for a place that had diversity in the clientele. For two of the other opportunities I got, I would be limited on what I would be working on. And so in order for me to kind of expand and my skill set in this space, I kind of wanted to be able to work on vast amounts of different things. And so until I was able to have that viewpoint, and which was like, you know, through this like trial and error, it was hard for me to find a job because I was applying for the wrong types of jobs. But once I found places that aligned with how I felt, places where I could leverage my work and it not feel as though like I'm lacking something, now I started to like kind of focus on those more so. So my advice overall is just like, you know, one is just the experience of going through the job hunt process. I think everyone is going to have to go through as far as like having interviews, getting to the last round, not getting a job. But I think as you are going through that process, just take a mental note of what's not working, what's working, rework your portfolio, rework your approach, maybe get more focused in on like the type of places you're targeting, because maybe the places that you're targeting right now aren't the places that you need to be targeting right now. You know, it's Sync, the place I'm going to be at for a long time. I probably got maybe like 2 or 3 years. 3 is like generous. You know, and I'm going to make a shift, you know, but what I'm focusing on right now is making sure I'm getting all the skill set I need that I was lacking before to make sure I'm able to make that pivot. So even if it's like an opportunity, you know, but the one thing I will say though is never take like an opportunity that you feel will hinder your process and going to like the next level. Because me working at A&L, although it's a great spot, I wasn't learning what I needed to learn, doing what I needed to do from a experience design standpoint. So that kind of set me back. And now I'm like kind of back on the train to like kind of get to that next point. So again, my advice would be just like, you know, take heed to like what you're learning as you're going through the interview process. Try to be as pointed and try to have as best you can like a POV as far as like what you want to learn, what you want to gain, where you want to be at, even if it's not the spot that you are initially applying to initially, just like if they're providing the skill sets and the work that you need to, that you want to do, I use that as an opportunity to get you to like get you to that next point.
That's great. What other questions do we have out there? Yeah, Audrey Lee, why don't you unmute and fire away?
Hi. So I don't know if this is kind of backpacking off of the last question, but you said that you had been fortunate enough to get this job during the pandemic. So I guess I would have to say, like, what advice would you have for some of us who are graduating pretty soon about like the current job uncertainty situation?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question. I think two things. I think the pandemic definitely has like shifted a lot of things, but a lot of places are hiring depending on what you're interested in doing. But the thing is that they pop up randomly. So I think just keeping an eye on what's coming up, because jobs will be like, Martin, I think just won some clients recently, so they have some openings. And so you kind of just have to like keep an eye on what's going on in the industry. And the best way for you to do that is just to like kind of be in tune with what's happening. The next piece is just networking. Even if it's like just like networking will be the key to any opportunity. I think like a place that may not be hiring right now could be hiring soon. And so using your time now to kind of build those relationships and like kind of network as much as possible, I think will be the best funnel during COVID to kind of use. Because essentially, you know, places don't post job openings. If they have them open, they may just go to the person that they know. And that's happened to me. That I've been hit up about people. If I knew anybody that was looking for a job, they never posted a job. They just asked me if I could connect them with somebody. And so that's a very common trend. So I would say like networking definitely, but also being in tune with what's going on in like the industry, who's winning clients, who's not winning clients, kind of like where all the jobs openings are coming from essentially, and use that like your best way to like navigate it.
Thank you.
Good. Stanley, I'm not going to ask you your favorite project that you've worked on in the past, but what's the one that you think you learned the most from?
Oh, yeah. All right. So like when I was working at Arts and Letters, we became agency of record for Google Chromebook. And essentially we was in charge of like rebranding, coming up with a whole new like branding platform for them. And so one of the projects that we did was to pretty much redo a lot of their tutorials in a new way. That included a lot of things. We did in-house production in a local production studio in Richmond. We had to create a site to house all the content. We had to figure out the formula for the content. We had to figure out the art direction, the structure for all the videos that we were doing, copywriting, etc. Design, all the UI components. And so essentially what my role was during that project was like everything but copywriting. Like, so, I was working heavily on production. I was working heavily on editing and directing our animators and editors, leading the charge on designing all the UI for all the, Google spots that we were making, and also designing the site, and working with our digital partners to bring it to life. And so that required like 8 months of my life. And also, was a lot of things that I was not exposed to before. And so I think just being able to work on that project and gaining appreciation for production and like a appreciation for all those disciplines I wasn't really diving into, as well as trying to apply as much experience design into as possible in the best way I could. Definitely was a challenging project, but it also kind of was helpful in gaining additional skill sets and kind of like, you know, owning a project from start to finish.
All right, great. You couldn't use that copy that I taught you. It was that's great. That's great. What other questions do we have for Stanley tonight?
I have a question. So I've been really interested in learning about user or just experience design in general recently. Like, so I've been talking about it so much, I actually keep on getting like ads about it, about like master's programs and like online boot camps and stuff like that. And I guess my question for you is, do you think it'd be worth looking into those things? Or do you think you'd recommend actually just going like head into like agencies and getting experience that way?
What year are you?
I'm a senior. I'm gonna graduate in the spring.
Oh, congrats. Yeah, that's a hard one. I would never tell anyone to get into more debt. But I think it really just depends on you. You know, experience design is broad. User experience is broad. I mean, you have so many different disciplines under it. You have UX design, you have UI design, you have UX UI design, you have experience design, you have UX strategy, you have UX copywriting, the list goes on, right? And so I think you can approach it from 3 different directions. The one direction is of course looking into like a master's program or a portfolio school, like Grant Center or Carnegie Mellon, or I think Miami Ad School has some UX classes to dive into. That's definitely one avenue you could take. The next avenue is like, you know, General Assembly or like a boot camp styled program where it's not as much money and it's not as much time. You just are essentially learning the fundamentals of how to do UX design for more of a traditional framework, right? The last thing I would say, the last approach would be just diving fully into it. You know, learning Figma, learning Sketch, learning prototyping tools. I think going in as an entry level or as an intern into the US space, you will have to know design. So, you know, with me particularly, you know, I do a little bit of design, but I'm not really responsible for that for the most part. But I feel like going into it, you may be required to do some of that. So understanding how to use Figma, understanding like design systems, understanding how to do UI design, and understanding the programs you need to do that, but also understanding like what is experience design, what is user experience, how do you do testing, conducting research, information architecture, site mapping, all that stuff. It's harder to do when you don't have actual like real projects to like real clients to go off of, which is why I think a lot of people tend to go towards the General Assembly school avenue. But you know, there's definitely opportunities that will bring people on. You just have to kind of get your book together and get your work together and kind of show your point of view on the space. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'll just chime in about what Stanley said. I am also a proud CUNY alum as well. So he went to Grad Center, I went to Hunter. Temple's great. Stay at Temple if they have what you need, but you're in New York City, so you're in the hub, right? And it's really, really affordable. Even, you know, I did a 2-year grad program in 3 years, so I was able to work part-time. And I was able to network while I was there. And after the first year, they didn't make me re-matriculate, and I got in-state tuition, and I was only paying like, I don't know, $5K a semester or something like that. And if you can work part-time in New York, and, you know, there's a chance you might not have to go into debt depending on what you need to do. I think being scrappy, right? Like working in the cracks. So, but anyway, just shout out to CUNY. But I'm Temple strong, you know, I'm not screwing with Temple.
That's it, George. We're going to talk about the contract. We'll have to see. No,
I mean, on top of that, though, sorry. I mean, on top of that, I feel like, you know, COVID has created this like funnel for you to like kind of dive into those spaces without actually moving to a city or investing as much money into those things. But I mean, honestly, like look into different conferences that may be happening from different orgs, try to get a framework of like what type of UX design you're trying to do. I'm more in like the, open space, and I like kind of apply it. But I mean, you have people who are more disciplined in the area and more traditional and are working on products. So like, depending on like what your mindset is and like what direction you're trying to go and trying to like finesse it from there. But I mean, definitely take advantage of like COVID, like as far as like the whole like working from home, being from home, because that could also like kind of save time, and you could definitely dive into different resources like that.
That's great. Good question, Kerry. What else? What other questions do we have for Stan? We can pick his brain.
I have a quick question. So you're saying that you really work more so like on the research end of user experience design. So I'm just curious a little bit like how you like pivoted to go into that direction rather than like design more so than research, if that makes sense. Just because of like your art direction background and stuff, I actually have a double concentration in art direction and brand strategy. And I found that I've kind of really like gone under this like more so creative side, not really like exploring the research end of things. So just to hear a little bit about that experience for you would be good.
Yeah, that's awesome. So like at Sync, how we're set up is that we have designers, and then we have me, my boss, as like the UX designers. And so essentially what we do is build a framework for anything that we're making. We're doing stakeholder interviews, we're creating insights, we're working heavily within strategy. The UX design department at Sync is combined with strategy, so we're like one essentially. And so like pretty much a core piece of it is digging and digging and digging until you find out what the crevice is, what you're trying to do. And then from that, we get into the whole process of making site maps and, looking at the information architecture, making the wireframes, making suggestions as far as like, recommendations of like what the motion should be or set up. And then that's passed off to our designers to really explore and break that down a little bit more. And so for me, starting off doing art direction, most of my freelance gigs I've had have been more design focused. I've always had an interest, and I really dove into this more when I was at Branson, and like dig into like the why. And I'm not like too heavy in research to a point where I'm just like, all into it. But I do like to figure out how to get to the core of what I'm trying to do and figure out the best way to like blueprint that out. I don't really too much care about like the pixel perfect approach or the colors being chosen or anything like that. Like that's not like a high level on my mind. I'm thinking like, okay, like what, like how can I make this dope as possible, make it as like useful as possible? Like how can I like make sure that the user is having a really good time on this experience? And all that kind of puts my focus on that. But me having a design background, me knowing how to play around with design systems, me knowing how to finesse design, me knowing how to do UI stuff, it's just beneficial long term and like when I'm working. It's like going back to what I was saying before, like even if you're focusing on like that creative space, like concepting and all that stuff, the baseline of it is strategy. So like having an understanding of that, even if you're not like in the weeds, and being able to like be articulate about how that can be applied to whatever concept you're creating creatively is only beneficial in the long term. So even though I'm not like focusing strictly on design and like design principles and design systems, I understand that type of stuff to a point where I'm able to easily apply it to whatever UX design or work I'm working on. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
That's great. And really, I love what you said there, Stanley, about, when you start to understand the why things are done, it really unlocks the rest of the process. And, you know, the longer that I've done what I've done in the creative space, it's always, I want to know the why more than I ever had before, because it just, things fall into place like never before. And then you can also stop sweating the things that aren't that important. And I think it was interesting that you say, you know, you don't worry about that perfect hex color. You know, you just want to make this thing awesome, right? And
Yeah.
get that end result for the user. That's awesome. All right, good. What other questions or thoughts do we have tonight?
I have a question actually. So I'm actually currently doing one of those UX boot camp things right now, and I'm an advertising major here at Temple. I'm actually in research. I feel like it kind of relates to UX, and I was always really interested in UX. That's actually why I picked advertising with that concentration. And I'm kind of like confused between like which job I should go for, if I should go for like a UX job or I should go for like maybe like an account planning job in an agency. I don't know, like how do you think like I should differentiate between that? Like what would be better to go for as like a first job?
It kind of depends on you and what you are gravitating towards the most. Account management is definitely way different than, as you know, from like what UX design is, right? Account management is more focused on, you know, managing the client. At some places, it's also coming up with the strategy and how you're approaching to like that, whatever problem, or pretty much creating like a brief for the creatives and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you're interested in UX design, it's definitely a whole different funnel to go down. So it's really just up to you and kind of like what direction you're interested in going in. If you are in like, what part of account management are you interested in the most?
Well, I'm taking an account planning class right now, and it's very much just seems very much like about the consumer. So I can see that I could see like a lot of similarities between UX design and account planning, I feel like. But if you're telling me I can go either way, then that's great. I just want to know if like one's like more attainable than the other, essentially, I guess, as like a first job. I feel like for me, like UX is like the end goal for me. I might like do like something else first, but I'm not quite sure if I should just hop right into it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, every experience is like a foundation. It's like a good foundation to wherever you're trying to go. Account planning, consumer based, that's focused on people and figuring out like how to get them to buy something. Experience design, user experience is essentially the same thing.
Exactly.
How
Yeah.
to get them not to like be turned off by it or and like an experience, right? And so essentially, like, you know, there's different pathways. So of course, if you want the account planning pathway, you just have to do your due diligence of, you know, staying on top of that space and also maybe trying to get some side work or something like that to build your portfolio. The core difference between, you know, account planning and UX design, art direction, copywriting, anything design is that you need a book. And so, you know, without having any work in your portfolio, you know, if you're 2 years out of Temple, I find it more difficult to kind of make that argument a little bit unless you go back to school or something, because, you know, you're not having any like client-based work or anything like that. So it kind of depends on what direction you're trying to go into. But with that said, you know, I know people who I went to grad school that started like Temple at like 30 something. I mean, that started at VCU at like 30 something to like do like a whole switch in their career. So, I mean, like you can definitely pivot at any point that you want to, just understand like what you need to have if you do choose to make that pivot just to like something else.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's good to hear that can go both ways. But like I have like a lot of UX work because of this like UX bootcamp thing that I'm taking right now called Springboard. So but yeah, it's good to know that can go either way. Thank you.
Yep. I mean, I would definitely say like, you know, structuring, if you don't already have a portfolio, start structuring your portfolio now, you know, and getting that together and just try to test the waters with both and try to figure out which one is like more accurate for where you're trying to go to. If you find an opportunity that's doing more account stuff and more strategy stuff that is more appealing to you right at this moment, and for you to like understand like people a bit more, and definitely lean into that because the core of experience design is like people. But if you feel like that whatever opportunity that may pop up from a UX standpoint based off your portfolio, if that aligns better to where you're trying to go, then go in that direction.
All right, that's really good advice. Thank you.
All right, great. What other questions do we have? Stan, do you have a site yourself? Do you have a portfolio site? You could maybe drop a link in the chat for everyone.
Yeah, I need to actually redo it, but it's the right. Yeah.
I started in 1994. Yikes, I'm old. My book has never been done. You know, it's and I'm George. I'm sure you feel the same way. Just you never have enough time, and it's never done. And that's the sign of a good creative too. If you're complacent and satisfied, you know, I don't know if I want to hire you.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
My grandfather used to say, "The cobbler's children have no shoes."
That's right. That's right. So we probably got time for a couple more questions if they're out there.
Hey, yes, Stanley, I have a question. Hey, what's up? My name is Taraji. So just like in terms of, let's say, creative projects or in terms of personal projects, how much should we emphasize personal projects? I know sometimes we dedicate more time to our personal projects than we do to our, let's say, like classwork or work that we get from internships. Like, how much should we emphasize personal projects when we're in interviews or when we're like in informational interviews or when we're just meeting up with folks who are at agencies that we want to be in?
One thing I would say is that people, especially if you're like doing like art direction or something like that, like or copywriting, they love to see side projects. That's like what they love to see. I would say this, especially starting off, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have any client-based work, right? You're not going to have anything directly from the client that you're producing that's being produced. And so the crevice of your portfolio and of your work is going to really be beholden to whatever projects you have that you worked on in school or a project that you had opportunity to work on during an internship, but also any side projects that can kind of show your skill set and your craft in a different light. And so, you know, your portfolio should definitely not be compounded of like every single thing you ever worked on. You know, it should be a place where you're putting like the work that you feel represents you the most and represents your craft. If you have a side project that you worked on that you feel hones in on your craft the most, then definitely add that to your portfolio and expand that. But more importantly, a side project or a side hustle can be easily turned into something that's feasible, like that could turn into like bread for you to make in the long run, right? So I mean, like definitely, I would definitely not say like, you know, pull off the side projects that you're working on. Just be cognizant of like what you're putting in your portfolio. Of course, if you're applying for jobs, if you're a creative or anything like that, you definitely want to have like some foundational work in there, but definitely dive into whatever side projects you have and put as much time as you can into them. Of course, like, you know, if you're in school, like, you know, don't do it to a point where you're getting bad grades or something like that. But outside of that, definitely dive into it and leverage it as much as possible when you're interviewing, especially if you don't have any like produced work.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. It really, as someone who hires creatives frequently, the book is great, but also you got to fit in with the culture and the people, and you have to show that you're interesting and curious, and the more range and variety and side gigs are fantastic. Side projects, and like Stan said, you never know, it can blow up to something big. The most famous side project that I always talk about in my classes is a little movie you might have heard of called Good Will Hunting, which, you know, was a side project for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Now there's a debate about how much they actually wrote themselves, but it was still just a side gig. So flex those muscles, especially if you're a creative, you know, because your classes aren't going to give you enough. and the real world isn't, you're not there yet. So yeah, keep plugging away on whatever those things. And if you're passionate about it, you're going to work on it hard enough. Just make sure it's really good stuff, really good work. All right, we got time for a final question tonight before we let Stan have his dinner and probably get back. He's got to go to bed soon. If he's checking in with London office every now and again, I bet your alarm clock goes off earlier than you wanted to.
I have a question. We were talking about this in my typography class earlier today, but I know you had said like you started out in art school, like you started at Tyler, and then you kind of moved through like to advertising, which is also what I did. I started out in Tyler, and then I moved into the advertising program, and then you moved into like experience design. Was there ever a point that you experienced like a overwhelming sense of like imposter syndrome, especially like when you were like during that like break you had, or when you were interviewing at a bunch of like different companies? Like, was there ever a time that like you really felt that, and like what do you think are like the best ways to kind of like remind yourself like, oh, I'm good at what I do, and like I'm going to get better at what I do? Because my professor was saying today, like every creative kind of has this problem. It never really goes away, but like, what is like did you experience that? And like, what are the ways that you kind of remind yourself that like where you are is good, and like where you're going is probably going to be like much better? Like, how do you kind of deal with like imposter syndrome?
Yeah, that's a good question. You will wait for like the last question to ask that. I think, damn, that's a good one. I'm gonna go like reverse. So I think like where I'm at right now at Sync, I did feel that initially, mainly because my boss kept saying, "You're the first U.S. hire I've hired in like 4 years," and so I was like, "Damn, like that's a high bar to come in at." And then on top of that, like the senior U.S. designer that was there for like 5 years left, like a couple months after I started. So definitely started to like feel like, damn, like I need to set my game up or whatever. But at the same time, like, Sync is a very small shop with very talented people, and I wouldn't be there if I wasn't at that same level. And so for me, I had to kind of take that into consideration as I'm diving into the work that I have. And, literally, the CEO of the company, like dope dude, hit me up on the side, like, yo, I'm hearing you doing some dope stuff. Keep it up. You know what I mean? So that was like affirmation for me, like, okay, I'm doing what I need to do. I do have moments like that when I'm working on projects, like, damn, like this is like gonna be a struggle. But I mean, like that could be fatigue and me working from home and everything like that. So, but kind of going backwards, I've definitely felt that way when I started out, especially as a designer. Mainly because I'm not that good in this program, or I'm not that whatever. But at the end of the day, like I got whatever I needed to get done, and I had no complaints for it. So I think just like as I continue to progress, even if I had moments where I like failed at something terribly, I've had a lot of those too. Um, just looking at the fact that everyone makes mistakes, everyone has their trials and errors, everyone has their moments of triumphs. Agencies, they lose clients, they lose pitches back to back. I know we were losing a few pitches back to back, and we started winning some. Just because you have a setback, or just because you have a moment of feeling that, why am I here? Essentially, that's all fine. I think having those questions and having that in your mind is okay, because essentially, it just shows that you're so passionate about like what you're doing, and that you still have a drive to make whatever work that you're making. But I would never let anyone else make me feel that way. I would have to like check them, but it's like more of an internal struggle. But I think that can be applied to anything.
Cool, thank you.
That's great. That's great. Alyssa, I saw you had your hand up. You put your hand up. I don't want to leave without all the questions answered that if you got them. So if you would like to ask your question, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. So my question was more about like the future, I guess, of experience design, like with the development of technology and stuff. Do you have like a mini prediction in your head, or like kind of like forefront of where the road's headed, kind of?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think things probably have sped up because of COVID. A lot of over the summer and in the fall, a lot of companies have been reaching out to a lot of agencies, companies that have been doing like conferences to try to figure out how can we make a virtual conference, how can we tap into VR. VR was like the really big topic like 5 years ago, and it as more technology comes out, there's a need to figure out how that can be implemented from a user standpoint. You have retail, I feel like, is going to be shopping overall within brick and mortar is definitely going to be drastically transformed because of COVID. It was already transforming already, but that's just going to like propel that much further. I think how we experience series and events is definitely going to 1 minute. Headphones died. Can you still hear me? Or okay, cool. So yeah, I think as we look at different moments that we have during COVID, about everything that kind of switched up a little bit, like all those moments are going to be pretty much changed via experience design because of COVID. So think of public transportation, airports. I think there's going to be a drastic switch in how planes are designed and like structured, essentially. How we experience shopping in grocery stores and how we experience shopping in general, how we experience events, how we experience virtual reality. I think that kind of propelled that space a little bit further, even more, as far as making it more consumer friendly. So overall, experience design is always evolving. So, year by year, day by day, something new is popping up. And as new technology is coming out, looking at different ways to implement it in a more consumer way would be like the framework. But definitely paying attention to like the areas that have been impacted mostly by COVID and like different innovations that are happening to like kind of brings back some like normalcy to it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you.
All right, that's great. I think the fact that we killed our guest's AirPods is a sign that we had him on too long. We drained his battery. Stan, I want to thank you again, for the students who we hear and all the students at Temple. Thank you for coming back, sharing some of your wisdom. Let's get you back here sometime soon in the future. And again, I can't thank you enough. And next time I see you pop up, maybe it won't be the little black book. Maybe it's going to be, I don't know, the Clios or the Effies or some other.
You never know.
And everybody who joined us tonight, thank you very much. We're going to do one of these every week for the next 4 or 5 weeks. Some are going to PR, some are creative, some are somewhere in between. So, wherever you see our good friend, the bird feeder, courtesy of Victoria, bring a friend. Let's eat some bird seed together.
Cool.
Have a great night, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you on campus sooner than later.